Great. Well, hello, everyone. It's great to be here and great to have you all here. And I'm really delighted to have Maeve Kim with us tonight to share her incredible experience with and passion for birding. I've known Maeve for a number of years and have just been delighted to know her in different guises, but as a birder. When my son was in middle school, he went on a field trip with Maeve, and it was just the most fabulous thing. These kids were they didn't have to go. They showed up early in the morning because they knew what a great experience that was going to be. After Maeve retired from public education, she began traveling for birding, writing about birding and learning more about birds and bird-friendly habitats. She's birded in about 20 different states as well as parts of Canada. She teaches birding classes all over the place: Ollie at UVM, CBU Access, MMU After Dark, Island Arts, Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge, libraries, other organizations, and has led almost 100 bird walks in Vermont and Massachusetts. Several of her articles have been published in Birdwatching magazine and local newspapers. She's also published 2 novels, and in the second one, which is called Ivy's Optics, I recommend it. It's a great book. Every character is either a birder or a bird. Tonight, Maeve is going to first of all talk about the importance of forest habitat for birds, and then she's going to take us on a tour of 3 different conserved properties in Chittenden County, which are shown on this map. Hang on, which are shown on this map. She will start with a tour. I'm going to just zoom in on this map a little bit. A tour at the Sherlock Park and Wildlife Refuge, which was conserved by the Demeter Fund in 1998 and conveyed to the town of Shallot. Then we'll head to Preston Pond Conservation Area in Bolton, which with the support of many funders was purchased in 2003 by Vermont Land Trust, and then with the help of TNC was transferred to the town of Bolton. Wonderful place to hike and visit. And finally, she's going to spend most of her time in Duxbury exploring the Ward Hill property, also known as the eBird hotspot Pratt Refuge, after Fred Pratt, an avid birder and conservationist who, with his late wife Chris, bought land on Ward Hill in 1970, added adjacent land over the years, and built a cabin as a summer retreat. They conserved the land in 2000 and then very generously gifted the property to Vermont Land Trust in 2019. Fred has gifted us all with 40 years of bird data at the Pratt Refuge. Some of you may already be aware of Fred's remarkable birding odyssey that he began with Chris in 2012, where he documented 150 species in all of Vermont's 14 counties, each within a calendar year. He finished in November 2019 with his son, John. We're delighted to have Fred with us this evening. Great to have you here, Fred. And thank you so much, Maeve, for being here. And I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite places and favorite birds. I'm losing my voice a little bit, but I have water here. The Vermont Land Trust has conserved almost 600,000 acres in the state, and it includes open agricultural land, wetlands, ponds, swimming holes, ski areas, grasslands, and over 400,000 acres of forested land. Well, all of these various kinds of habitat are important, but wetlands, grasslands, and forests are especially vital to the survival of many bird species. Wetlands have been called nature's super habitat, and grasslands provide nesting sites for several species of birds that are declining worldwide. And they're also migration stopovers and wintering grounds for huge numbers of birds like snow geese, all those white blobs in the background, and sandhill cranes. Here's even a better picture of snow geese enjoying some grassland in Addison. But tonight we're going to be celebrating the conservation of forests, of Vermont's forests particularly. The world's forests, northern forests, tropical forests, Pacific rainforests, host vast numbers of wildlife, including birds. And healthy forests are also carbon sinks, which can help slow down the progress of global warming.
Maeve, can I just pause? Maeve, do you mind if we pause for just a minute? I'm getting a couple messages in the chat that some folks are having a little bit trouble hearing you. Could you increase your volume a little bit on your mic?
Yes, I just did.
Okay.
Okay, I hope that's... The Atlantic Northern Forest of Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and New York is home to the greatest diversity of breeding bird species in the continental United States. And sadly, the populations of many of those birds that have thrived there for ages are declining at alarming rates. We've all seen the headlines, 3 billion birds lost. The world is losing bird populations and even bird species at a frightening rate. And some of the most dramatic declines affect Vermont's songbirds, neotropical migrants, like this little black-throated green warbler. These are birds that leave us every year when the days start getting short and the nights start getting long and the temperatures start getting frosty. These are birds that spend our summers up here in northern woods with us and our winters in tropical forests. And sadly, the northern breeding areas of these birds and their southern wintering areas have both seen significant habitat loss and habitat degradation. Right up here in northeastern United States, high elevation forests have been declining since the 60s, a decline that's expected to increase with climate change. And in our birds, the birds we see during the summer, and in their traditional wintering grounds in South and Central America, about 17 million acres of tropical forest cut down or burned down every single year. Almost 1.5 football fields every 4 seconds. Land is being clear cut, heavily treated with herbicides, and then often planted with 2 crops that we up here in North America demand, and that is palm oil and relatively inexpensive coffee. Most of the birds with declining populations are warblers, and we'll spend a lot of time with warblers this evening. Small and active neotropical migrants that delight and confound birders. There are so many causes and so many factors involved in the loss of tropical forests and the decline of bird numbers. It's an incredibly tangled problem for conservationists and governments to tackle. And it's going to require international cooperation on an unprecedented scale. Of our tree species in the forests are threatened with devastation from 3 imported insects, the emerald ash borer, the Asian longhorned beetle, and the hemlock woolly adelgid. And when the trees go, the birds that depend on those trees for food, for nesting and roosting places, for shelter from predators, they also go. Well, all of us, citizens of the globe, can help. First, we have to be aware of the extent of the challenges. And there are some relatively easy steps that every one of us can do, one of which is to buy shade-grown and bird-friendly coffees, which are identified by that seal right here, the bird-friendly coffee by the Smithsonian. Here are 2 delicious coffees, good for the birds, good for the humans who raise the coffee, good for the environment. And we can boycott, palm oil, which is thought to be the cause of at least 10% of tropical forest devastation over the last 2 decades. And of course, we can actively support organizations that protect and conserve vital habitats, including Vermont Land Trust, a leader in forest conservation. When I started working on this presentation, I was surprised and excited to find out how many forested areas fairly close to where I live in Jericho are conserved because of the Vermont Land Trust. We're going to spend most of our time this evening making a virtual visit to one of those properties. But first, I'd like to just introduce you to a few others, places you might want to visit. One of our very favorite places to walk and watch birds is the Shallot Park and Wildlife Refuge. Every single time I've been there, I've been so grateful to Vermont Land Trust. And I'm sure the birds of this park's woods and wetlands and grasslands are also grateful. This 290-acre park between Route 7 and Greenbush Road has a wide diversity of habitats, with trails winding through meadows, agricultural fields, and woodlands. In spring, the wooded areas of the park are full of warblers, singing thrushes, vireos, and other songbirds. On one visit, we were delighted to see a female rose-breasted grosbeak on her nest right next to the parking lot, while her mate kept a watchful eye on us from a nearby tree. For park, like this couple gathering food for their nestlings. If you see, the male has a big bug in his bill. Brown thrashers and gray catbird treat visitors to huge repertoires of songs and sounds and noises and imitations of other things. The loud, drink your tee-hee-hee-hee song of eastern towhees can be heard from dense thickets and occasionally from the top of small saplings. In fall, white-throated sparrows do their little leaf-throwing dance in the undergrowth, looking for insects. And at any time of the year, woodpeckers can be seen and heard in the woods. The high elevations of Shallot Park and Wildlife Refuge are open rather than forested, with wonderful spacious views of the Champlain Valley, the lake, and the Adirondacks. And even more exciting to me than the views, both eastern meadowlarks and bobolinks, like this beautiful little male, have nested in the open fields at Shallot Park. The populations of both of those iconic grassland species have been declining since the 60s or so, down 65% for bobolinks and alarming 89% for eastern meadowlarks. And that means that every single extensive field being managed for grassland birds, like the fields at Shallot Park and Wildlife Refuge, can make a significant difference. Another great conserved place is the Preston Pond Conservation Area in Bolton. It's probably visited much more often by walkers and hikers and people who just love the views than by birders. But still, 54 species of birds were reported there in 2020 and 2021 so far. And peregrine falcons have been seen more than once and are believed to actually nest in the area. Libby's Look is a popular destination for visitors with panoramic views of rolling hills and dense forested land. The Vermont Land Trust bought 400 acres in 2003, and then, as Liz mentioned, with help from the Nature Conservancy, the land was transferred to the town of Bolton. We have visited this place. We have visited and appreciated almost all of these VLT protected lands, not far from our home. And other locations are on our to-do list to walk this year. Forested land is particularly important to the soul, to the psychology and physiology of humans. I want to tell you a quote A little farther from us than these places, in South Hero, VLT has conserved the Landon Farm Community Trail. I took a group from one of my birding classes here, and I love a comment made by one of the participants. He said that he had been struck by how quiet and alert everyone became as soon as we entered the woods. People even started placing their feet down more carefully, he said. It was as if we were all intent on drinking in whatever the forest was breathing out and making it part of our very selves. After we got back to the parking lot, we talked about the Japanese practice of Shinrin Yoku, or forest bathing, and the many positive effects that spending time in a forest has been found to have on human beings. Now, let's take a walk on a truelid land, and this property is well known to bird watchers throughout Vermont. Because owners, Fred and Chris Pratt, hosted warbler walks there for many years. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, warblers are small birds that can often frustrate people because many of them flit constantly from high branch to higher branch, never still, often seen for just a split second, and often seen from below, like these two. And they're even more frustrating in the fall, when the males have lost their glorious breeding plumage, and when many species can look amazingly alike. Well, the Pratts were expert birders who traveled to many places in the United States and in other countries to look for birds and look at birds. They both had an extraordinary ability to recognize Vermont's warblers by sight and sound, locating and identifying even those confusing fall warblers with skill and cautious about sharing their knowledge with others.
Maeve, I'm sorry to interrupt again.
Chris owned this piece of beautiful.
Maeve, I'm sorry to interrupt again. Your audio is getting a little choppy. Maybe if we turn off your video, it might help the connection a little better.
Okay.
Yeah, try that. The audio is just a little choppy to hear.
Just a minute. I'm going to have to back up, get out of this, go to here. I'm not sure how to get rid of it. Yes, I can.
So if you just go to the bottom left hand of your screen, just hit the button that says stop. It'll say stop video. Okay, great. Thank you.
Except it always starts again at the beginning. Fred and Chris built beautiful views of Camel's Hump from their property, which I think were used in the first, almost this exact same picture was used in the first slide you saw. The cabin they used as a summer retreat, and every single time they stepped out the door, every time they heard an owl hooting in the night, every time they heard a songbird through an open window, Fred made notes. And his almost half century of records provides an invaluable picture of the richness of this property. The observations have been entered in eBird, a vast data bank maintained by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And eventually and from now on in this program, every single species of bird that you'll see has been seen at the Pratt Refuge, along with many, many others that we don't have time to enjoy this evening. Longtime friend Pat Folsom recalled the Pratt's spring and fall warbler walks, always on the weekends of Memorial Day and Labor Day. Pat is in the foreground of this group of mad birders, bird watchers, most of whom live in the Mad River Valley. The Pratt's first warbler walks were for this group, but soon birders from other parts of the state joined in. And Pat recalled Fred could relate the exact year when he had first seen certain warblers, or the only year he had seen some rare warbler. Most of the time, Fred and Chris preferred birding together alone, so we were always thankful to have these walks to look forward to. Everyone loved being in the Pratt's company and learned so much from both of them. The group would follow Fred around the fields, learning the songs, the chip notes, the markings of warblers, eventually learning to distinguish one warbler from another. We learned to look and listen where the sun first hit the trees and to follow the mixed feeding flocks along the tree lines. And all of us birders, by the way, who learned that lesson from Fred, always look to the tops of trees where the sun hits first in the morning, because we know that right there is where tiny caterpillars and other insects will start being active, warmed by the rising sun. And when the bugs start moving, the warblers start feeding. To date, 119 species of birds have been seen on the Pratt land, 119 species, including 25 kinds of the couple's beloved warblers. We'll take a virtual walk and see some of these beautiful flitting birds after I give credit to some people. First, most of the photos used in this presentation were taken by my partner, Bernie Paquette, and others were sent to me by fellow birders. And if you see a photo with a GPS coordinate in the lower right-hand corner, they're from the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Report about the property. And second, the Pratts have had 2 professional assessments of their land done. These 2 documents, provided by Caitlin Cusack of VLT, gave me a lot of background information for this presentation. Both reports emphasize the landowner's goals for their property. First and foremost, the Pratts would be good land stewards, and all the other goals are just ways of achieving that main goal. The Pratt property lies on gentle to steep topography on the shores of Ward Hill. Like so much of the state, a lot of the property was open farmland or sheep pasture prior to 1900 or so. Now the land is a good example of abandoned agricultural land that has reverted to forest, with various kinds of maples, various kinds of birch, white pine, balsam fir, ash, spruce, and beech. When Bernie and I took a walk on the Refuge in mid-May, we sort of wondered if the slashes on this beech tree in the top middle of the slide might have been made by a black bear. There are also several old apple trees and some open areas. The land is crisscrossed by stone walls. And there are also a jumble of rocks in one place that we thought might have been an old cellar hole. I'll have to find out about that. There are also old fence lines and logging roads, testimony to the land's agricultural and timbering past. As this picture and this picture show, many of the trees are fairly small in diameter and appear to be about the same age. This is common in Vermont forests, many of which were clear-cut in the second half of the 1800s. But there are some larger trees, some living, some standing as dead snags, and some fallen. All of these provide homes for insects, birds, and mammals. Big snags and good-sized cavity trees are good nesting and roosting habitat for pileated woodpeckers like this one. I love this picture because you can see his tongue as he reaches out to get an ant. And the big trees are great for roosting and nesting for barred owls. Some of the forest is softwood mixed forest. And these areas provide food as well as nesting and roosting places for many kinds of wildlife. Yellow-bellied sapsuckers make their small round holes in tree trunks, and then they drink the sap and they eat the small insects that have been attracted to the sweet fluid. Purple finches sing from high in the conifers. The famous Roger Torrey Peterson called the males like this one sparrows that had been dipped in raspberry juice. In the spring, warblers flit from tree to tree on the Pratt Refuge. This is called a black-throated green warbler, and it's sometimes hard to even notice that the back is greenish because our attention is immediately drawn to that yellow face and the black throat. These birds have two distinct sounds, both of which we heard when we walked the Pratt Refuge in May. One is a buzzy zee-zoo-zee-zoo-zee, and the other sounds like bees, bees in the trees. These lovely birds have very little to do with magnolias. Lots of birds were given their English names by the first white person who captured one. And a man named Alexander Wilson found one of these bright-colored little birds in Mississippi in a magnolia tree, and that was it. And they're almost never in magnolias. A better name would have been maybe spruce warbler, because the birds breed in dense stands of young conifers. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology starts their description of the next bird with "No birder can forget that first breeding male Blackburnian warbler." And I think that's true. The intricate and beautiful patterns of the plumage and that amazing flame-colored throat are truly gasp-producing. Conifers are also great habitat for kinglets, tiny, hyperactive little birds that flash neon signs on the top of their heads when they're excited. Ruby-crowned kinglets and golden-crowned kinglets have both been seen at the Pratt Refuge. Another bird that loves coniferous forests is the dark-eyed junco. These are adaptable little birds, breeding in forests all the way from sea level to over 11,000 feet. They often come to backyard feeders here in Vermont in the winter, and in the summer, they can be found atop our state's highest mountains. Juncos can show an astonishing amount of individual variability. Most of the males in our area have charcoal gray to black hoods like this one, and backs and wings, with white bellies. But some are paler gray. Females are often lighter colored with some brown in their plumage. Sometimes an individual junco is all mottled, like this one, or this one. But they all have pink bills and white outer tail feathers to help us identify them. If we leave behind the juncos and the kinglets and walk from softwood mixed forest of the Pratt Refuge with its many conifers to hardwood mixed forest, we're apt to see other species of warblers, including American redstarts. These active little birds hop from branch to branch, peering under leaves to find tiny insects. They often flash those brightly patterned wings and tail, behavior that's believed to startle bugs into moving. It's common, by the way, for warblers to exhibit a high degree of sexual dimorphism. That means the two species of the two sexes look quite different. Female American redstarts have olivish brown, where the males have black, and yellow, where the males have orange. And black-throated, oh, there's a female right there. I'd forgotten I had this wonderful picture. Black-throated blue warblers also love hardwood mixed forests. They often sing from fairly high up in the trees, but they nest in dense undergrowth, only 3 to 5 feet above the ground. The global population of these handsome little birds has actually been increasing, in contrast to so many other species. Scientists believe that the numbers for this species are really just getting back to normal after sharp declines in the last half of the 19th century due to the widespread clear cutting that happened in this area. And if we look up, 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 we might see scarlet tanagers here also. The red and black velvet males and their yellow mates. This male rather, looking a little messy, was in the process of losing his breeding finery and growing strong new feathers for the long flight across the Gulf of Mexico to South America. Tanagers tend to stay way up in the canopy, but birders are sometimes alerted to their presence by their loud chick-burr call and their robin-like singing. Eastern wood pewees launch themselves from bare branches to catch flying insects. Their plaintive sound can be heard on almost any forest walk. Pee, peer. It's a real treat if you're lucky enough to find a pewee nest. The nests are placed on lateral branches and then they're camouflaged with bits of lichen, hard for humans to see, and more important, really hard for predators to find. Thrushes, the Vermont state bird, the hermit thrush, and this beautiful wood thrush love hardwood forests too, and are fairly common on the Pratt Refuge. Veeries are thrushes too, but they don't have those dark streaks or splotches on the breast that characterize some of their relatives. Veeries sing an almost eerie, downward spiral song at dusk and sometimes at dawn. And all day long, not at dusk and dawn, as long as the sun shines, red-eyed vireos sing incessantly from the high canopy. Even though the names sound familiar, by the way, veeries and vireos aren't even closely related. One birder in Canada sat outdoors for a whole day using a clicker to keep track of how many times one male red-eyed vireo sang in that one day. And the total was just over 20,000 times. This feisty little bird was nipping Mark Labar's hand during a bird banding demonstration at the Audubon Center in Huntington. Ovenbirds build their little pizza oven nests right on the forest floor, and they feast on the many tiny invertebrates that live in deep leaf litter. These well-camouflaged birds are heard much more often than they're seen. They loudly sing, teacher, 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 or maybe chirtee, 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 almost all day from May into July. There's a Robert Frost poem that says, "There is a singer everyone has heard, loud, a mid-wood and a midsummer bird." Frost was right. If you walk in a Vermont forest, you will hear an ovenbird. When Bernie and I walked at the Pratt Refuge, we heard at least 8. And we got good looks at a pair that was either a male and a female courting or 2 males challenging each other for that specific part of the forest. This species doesn't exhibit sexual dimorphism. The males and females look alike to our eyes. Other hardwood mixed forest denizens in the Pratt lands are Cooper's hawks. They build their good-sized nests about 2/3 of the way up mature trees, sometimes hardwoods, every now and then pines or spruces. These handsome birds are designed for chasing smaller birds through dense woodlands. They've got relatively stubby wings, so they don't hit them on closely growing trees, and long tails that they actually use for steering. The Cooper's hawk's smaller cousin also specializes in small birds. As is the case with most raptors, the females are considerably larger and heavier than the males, and sharp-shinned hawks use this difference to their advantage. Right after hatching, nestlings are fed mostly by their father, who catches small prey for them to eat. But as they grow, the mother starts doing most of the catching and feeding, bringing larger prey to satisfy the increasing needs of the growing chicks. Broad-winged hawks also nest in a wide variety of trees, usually in the lower third of the canopy. This photo was taken in Huntington, not on the Pratt property, but I could not hope for a better view of a broad-winged hawk than I had on the Pratt Refuge. I was standing in a quiet patch of wood with Bernie several yards ahead of me, and suddenly a large bird appeared from nowhere to my side, flying below the trees, well below the canopy. And when it was only about 6 yards from me, it apparently saw me, veered off, angled to a distant tree, and perched there for several minutes before flying away again. It was the closest I had ever been to a broad-winged hawk. It's not just the big trees that provide great habitat. Smaller trees are homes for many smaller birds. A hairy woodpecker nest has an entrance that's only about 2 inches around, but the inside opens up to a comfy 12 inches deep, wider at the bottom and the top, so there's plenty of room for nests of growing youngsters. Downy woodpeckers are quite crafty in their nest placement. They often choose small stubs coming out of a larger branch that leans slightly downward, and then they make their cavity entrance on the underside, well hidden from cruising sharp-shinned hawks and Cooper's hawks. Other birds that nest in smaller trees include black-capped chickadees, red and white-breasted nuthatches, and tufted titmice. Titmice, as you can see here, don't have the right kind of bills to excavate their own nesting cavities. So they use either natural holes in trees or cavities drilled by other birds. The Pratt Refuge's fields and edges and forest openings provide another kind of habitat, and one that is loved by many, many kinds of wildlife. The low vegetation is excellent browse for deer, and small rodents are running around. Excuse me again. Small rodents are running around, and they attract foxes, coyotes, and other predators. And the edge habitat is wild turkeys. And because edge habitat is rich in insects, it's a veritable grocery store for bats and for birds like eastern phoebes that catch insects on the fly. We watched a phoebe actively catching bugs right near the Pratt cabin. Edge habitat is also home to 3 gloriously colored birds. Chestnut-sided warblers, the only small bird with reddish streaks on the side and a cap that is almost chartreuse. We heard several of these handsome warblers on our Pratt Refuge walk. And male indigo buntings, someone described them as scraps of sky. The females are brown, sometimes with a bit of blue in the wings. Fred Pratt told me that indigo buntings had often nested on the property. And rose-breasted grosbeaks love shrubby forest edges and thicket with brooding chicks, by the way, but male rose-breasted grosbeaks do. They're good husbands and daddies. The female incubates most of the day and all night, and then her mate relieves her for several hours every day. And the couple sings quietly to each other whenever they switch places. One of my favorite birds also loves early successional forest and forest edges, and we encountered several of them many of them, on our Pratt Refuge walk. Common yellowthroats are warblers, but they're so much kinder to humans than most of their relatives. They don't hang out so far up in the trees that bird watchers develop the dreaded warbler neck, a condition that has led some birders to suggest taking a chiropractor along on any warbler walk. No, common yellowthroats nest and spend most of their lives fairly near the ground. And they help out birders even more by having a loud and easily recognized song, a witchety witchet, witchety witchet, witchety witchet. And these pleasing little birds seem to be actually curious about people. Often when we make the pishing noise, psh, 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 that birders do to draw birds in, common yellowthroats burst out of the underbrush to check us out. Another reason that the Pratt Refuge has so much wildlife is all the water. There are little streams and rivulets and pools everywhere. We even found places where streams just appear from underground. And there is also at least one vernal pool, a depression in the land that fills with water in spring and sometimes autumn. Vernal pools provide essential breeding habitat. I've talked a lot about trees, but it's not just the trees that make a forest rich. The understory is full of wonderful plants, plants such as hobblebush. And the forest floor is a riot of vegetation with mosses and ferns and more ferns and mosses. And there are also lots of kinds of spring wildflowers, including the sometimes hard to find Jack in the Pulpit. When Bernie and I visited, there were dozens of red trilliums in bloom not far from the cabin. Let's look at three more of the Pratt's beloved warblers, those special little birds that this couple studied and learned and shared with others for decades, and that they saw on their own property. The first two sound as if they should have a lot in common, Nashville and Tennessee, but they're not closely related at all, and they like different kinds of habitat. Nashville warblers are another species that was named or misnamed by the first European visitor to see it. He saw one near Nashville, Tennessee, and he didn't even know the bird was only migrating through and wouldn't be spending more than a day or two a year in that part of the world. Nashville warblers breed in scrubby second growth areas, just like right around the Pratt's cabin. Tennessee warblers, on the other hand, are usually seen in the Duxbury area only during migration, starting in late August. And they breed in boreal woods, such as Vermont's Northeast Kingdom. And the most widespread and common kind of warbler, the aptly named yellow-rumped warbler. Only the breeding males have that dramatic black and white and charcoal gray and yellow plumage, but all of the species have the diagnostic yellow rump that earned them the name butterbutt. Yellow-rumped warblers are versatile foragers. Sometimes they dart out from trees like flycatchers to catch insects. Sometimes they pick bugs off manure piles or even off washed up seaweed. Sometimes they skim almost like a swallow over the surface of water, catching insects as they go. And once they're done with, in fact, this is the only warbler that can digest bayberries and wax myrtles, an ability that lets them winter much farther north than any other warbler. A few of these versatile little birds have overwintered as far north as Newfoundland. Yellow-rumped warblers have been seen in Vermont every single month of the year, although of course they're most often seen from early April through October. If you travel out west, you're apt to see a different subspecies of yellow-rumped warblers. Our eastern birds had white throats, and the western variety had yellow throats. And people used to think that they were two separate species until DNA testing came along. Well, we have now seen over 36 species of birds, and that's only a small part of the 119 kinds of birds that have been seen on this wonderful property. Thanks to the thoughtful planning and generosity of the Pratts and to the Vermont Land Trust, these birds will continue to be seen and enjoyed on this wonderful piece of land. I mentioned earlier the wonderful psychological and physical effects that being in nature, and specifically walking in a forest, can have on humans. Well, here's the two of us at the end of our 3-hour walk at Pratt Refuge, looking at birds, marveling over wildflowers, watching sun sparkles on the water, feeling soft breezes, and soaking in quiet and peace. Thank you so much for letting the two of us share this place and these birds with you. And I think now one of the Vermont Land Trust people, and then we'll be open for questions or comments.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maeve. That was a great tour, and I just loved all the nuggets and just the story you wove through all 3 of those properties. But it definitely, having spent some time at the Pratt Refuge, gives me a really wonderful, in-depth look, and I can't wait to continue to keep learning all these birds. So just a couple announcements before we get into some questions or just share some comments for Maeve. We will be sending a follow-up email. As I mentioned, this is recorded. So in that follow-up email, we'll have the recording link to our YouTube page. We will send a survey as well. We do take your feedback to heart. So if you could take some time to just fill out some comments on tonight's program, we would appreciate it. And then just mention a couple of other events coming up. On June 23rd, Liz is going to partner with Tori Helwig from the University of Vermont to talk about gardening with wildflowers. July 1st, Liz is going to do a tour of Vermont natural areas from the ground up. And then on July 27th, the foresters will be doing a summer tree ID. And if this has been such like a tantalizing taste of all these 3 properties. And so in that email as well, we will send a link to the Land Trust recreation map, which has directions and links to more information of how to access all 3 of those properties if they're properties that you're not familiar with. So that will all be in the follow-up email. So with that, I think we'll see if I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but I do see a question here from Grace, Maeve, and that is, can anyone, okay, this is I can answer this one, Maeve. I know that this came up before. So on the Pratt Refuge, it says, can anyone bird there now? It says restricted access on eBird. And that is just because of just some limited parking. And so there is parking at the cabin. And again, Grace, feel free to, there aren't really many trails on the property, but feel free to go and bird there. I just asked that if you could park at the cabin, or there's a couple spaces on Ward Hill, but if there are too many cars on Ward Hill, I just don't want to interrupt the neighbor's use of the road. So just everyone, just use your judgment. And I would say, please come and enjoy birding on the property. Great. I see lots of comments here, Maeve. You probably can see them too. Amazing photographs, wonderful presentation. I guess while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I don't know if this is an unfair question for a birder, but Maeve, do you have a favorite bird or maybe a favorite couple of birds?
I have an answer for that. My favorite bird tends to be the one that I'm looking at that moment. So no, I don't think so. Although I love common yellowthroats. They're friendly, sweet, wonderful little truly common warblers that are accessible to everybody. I've given a lot of bird walks for beginning birders, and including one in which a man said at the very beginning, "I just want to tell you, I don't believe warblers exist." But then we saw common yellowthroats up close, and he changed his tune. So that's one of my favorites. But other than that, I really like all birds.
Maeve, I have a question for you too. And maybe you could turn your camera back on now. It should be all right, just so everyone can see you. And I'm wondering, what is your favorite bird guide?
For some reason, I can't turn my camera back on.
Okay.
Yes, I can. No, I can't. Yes, I can. Okay.
There you are.
I strongly recommend the Sibley guide. The original Sibley guide to the birds of North America was huge. It was this heavy tome. But then he divided it into two, Eastern birds and Western birds. They're wonderful. There are other good ones out there, but that's my go-to guide, and I think it is for many other people. You can also get the Sibley guide as an app that you can put on your phone or tablet, and then you'll also have the birds' sounds to enjoy. It's an extraordinary piece of work, the Sibley guide.
Wonderful. Thanks, Maeve. I just put the link in the chat for everyone, and we'll include that in the follow-up email. So I have a question here for you, Maeve, from Anonymous. And this person is wondering if any birds stay in Vermont over the winter.
Oh, yes, many. Someday I should like to know what the percentage is. I'm guessing, this is a guess, about a third of the species we see in the summer will also be here in the winter. We've got all the woodpeckers, blue jays, believe it or not, robins and bluebirds spend the winter in Vermont. Many kinds of raptors and owls, chickadees, nuthatches, juncos, goldfinches, house finches, purple finches. There's a lot going on in the winter in Vermont. But then when May comes, the numbers go up by the day. Just extraordinary. In a surge of incoming birds.
Wonderful. Yes, I know May is such an exciting time. Everything is coming to life again.
I know, and you can't see it all at once.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I don't see any more questions. So Maeve, I guess sort of last sort of thoughts for us, or last tips, maybe sort of advice for, beginning or, amateur birders like myself that are just wanting to learn more.
And perhaps also, Maeve, any other resources that you would recommend?
I'd like to recommend our bird blog, which is called VT birdsandwords.blog.com. I think that's right. Caitlin, I gave it to you. Will you put that in the resources?
I will. Yep.
Good. That has a huge, if you go to resources on our blog, there's a huge long list of places to bird in the area, of groups that lead regular guided bird walks, of resources to learn bird song, etc. And then just fun posts about birding. We put many posts on about pandemic birding when we were at home all the time and we weren't traveling at all. And it turned out to be a great gift to us. We saw amazing things here in our own backyard, pandemic birding, all of which Bernie photographed and we have on our blog. So that would be one resource. Another great resource is eBird. Anyone can join eBird, get an account. It's free. And when you get an account, you can also you can look at other people's reports. Like if you want to look up Pratt Refuge, you look at Pratt Refuge and you will see a list of all the 119 species of birds that have been seen there, with information about who saw them and what time of year, what time of day, etc. and then you can put in your own records. Yes, Bernie just handed me our thing. It is called vtbirdsandwords.blogspot.com. That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure. I don't know if you can, you probably might be able to see this.
Yeah, and Mev, I put the link in the chat, so folks can get it right there, and then we'll put it in the follow-up email.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, so we had a couple more questions come in. One from Anonymous again. Do you think that bird feeders are helpful or harmful overall?
Cornell Ornithology Lab has answered that question a couple of times after doing a lot of studies. And they found out that in general, wintering birds will winter in areas where there's enough natural food. In other words, they don't need the suet and the seeds we put out. However, in bad storms, or if we have late spring storms, backyard bird feeders can actually help some species keep alive. They can also help barred owls keep alive in winters when there's a hard crust on the snow and they can't hunt in their regular wooded areas. So they come and hang out in your bird feeders and they pick off the rodents that come out at night to pick up drop seed. So Cornell says on balance, bird feeders have done some good. They only do negatives if they're not kept clean, so that they become, well, they actually poison birds. If we are going to feed birds, we have a responsibility because it's not normal to gather a lot of birds in one place. And if there's disease, it can spread there. So that's the one negative about bird feeding. The prevalence of backyard bird feeders in our area is considered to be one of the reasons why northern cardinals and tufted titmice have extended their range northward and now are common breeders in our area and stick around all year because they really love backyard bird feeders. So I don't know if that answered Anonymous's questions, but I would say, oh, one other thing. I think bird feeders in the back do a wonderful job of getting people interested in the birds that live around them. And that alone has got to be a positive.
Agreed. I know it has worked for our family. That was great. So lots of information there in your answer, Mev. Thank you. So Annette was wondering, years ago, they had a number of evening grosbeaks, and they're wondering what has happened to them. They haven't seen them for years.
Yes, in the 80s and 90s, we used to get 40 or 50 at a time, and they would go through 10 pounds of sunflower seeds in an afternoon. Well, apparently that wasn't a normal population. Evening grosbeaks love spruce budworms. And right before that, there was a huge spruce budworm outbreak in Canada, where evening grosbeaks tend to breed. And that meant huge and abnormally large populations of that species of bird. Since then, Canada had a serious spraying program, unfortunately, to kill spruce budworms, but I see why they did that. And that decreased the numbers. The numbers are rising again. There's one birder in the Northeast Kingdom who uses his own driveway as a bird feeder. Every morning he just goes out and throws seed around. Every afternoon he rakes it up. And he has posted pictures of the 150 evening grosbeaks who came to his driveway almost every day for several months this winter. So they are coming back. If we have another spruce budworm outbreak, we probably will see evening grosbeaks the year after. But they've never been a really common bird except for those wonderful years in the 80s and 90s.
Wow, fascinating. Great. So Nicole is wondering, Mev, is it good to take your pet's fur that they shed or lose and place it outside for birds to use for nest building?
Yes. Birds, hummingbirds really like dog hair, by the way. I read just recently that you shouldn't put human hair out there because it tends to be sharper and it can get wrapped around little developing fledglings' legs and can do damage. But cat and dog fur is supposed to be really good. And some birds actually take hair off living horses. So yes, that would be a nice thing to do. It's a little late this year, but next year, maybe in late April, put some out and see what birds use it.
That's great. Wonderful. Well, I think that wraps up our questions, and it's a little after 8. So we will say, Maeve, thank you again. This has been just a wonderful evening, and appreciate all the time and thought you put into sharing with us tonight. So Liz, Liz or Maeve, do you have any other sort of parting comments for everyone before we say goodnight?
Thank you so much, Maeve. It's been just great. Thank you.
Go to the Vermont Land Trust website and look at there's a wonderful map of all their areas and start exploring them. It would make a lovely project to explore them all.
And we will include that reference to our recreation map in the follow-up email list of resources.
Good. Thank you all, everybody.
Sounds great. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.